Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and I came across this yesterday and I wanted to share it with you. This is a statement that Doug Collins, who is the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee in the House, said on, HR 5. This was a statement that he made, and it's here in text, and I'll put the link down below for that, but I'm going to actually show you the clip, and I want to make some comments as we go through it, so I'll kind of break it up as we go, because he makes some really good points, and I think if we take it a little bit at a time, it'll sink in a little easier, and we'll understand some of the magnitude of what he's saying. So, here's the first clip I've got for you.
Madam Speaker, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the gentleman from California for being here today and covering for us. Madam Speaker, this is, again, we've talked about this. The Democrats in this bill are pushing something quickly, and we've talked about this many times, and sometimes I just want to talk about this because I feel that if we go through this, we look at it, however well-intentioned the bill is, it's not coming under a full scrutiny, and we've seen this. After considering only 4 amendments at committee and rejecting each of them, including 3 that simply added rules of construction, the chairman requested the House consider this bill under a closed rule, and his request was granted. Now, we can disagree about policy, but it is hard to argue this bill wouldn't have been improved by full debate about what the bill says in consideration of as many amendments as possible.
Okay, so if you notice on this first part, he's laying down the foundation for why he's making his statement as he is, because when they have a bill, it goes into committee, and then the committee discusses it, and, the other side can propose amendments and everything. It goes back and forth. Well, what happened here is they're pushing it through really quick, and this is a tactic that the Democrats like to use because if they push it really quick, then people don't have time to discuss it. This is what they did with Obamacare. Nancy Pelosi, remember, she said you have to pass it first before you read it. Well, that's what they want to have happen, that people will pass the legislation without actually reading it and seeing where the problem areas are. And this, is a situation that we have going on in the House right now because the Democrats are so eager to pass their legislation that, they're really pushing it, and this is one of the tactics they're using. So let's go on.
Americans can all agree, and everyone deserves to be treated with respect. No one should be mistreated by his employers, co-workers, or frankly, anyone else. However, when lawmakers propose amendments to federal law, we must avoid doing harm than good. We also must look at not pass legislation that could harm children, set back rights of women, have fought so hard to obtain, and erase the gains made possible by other federal civil rights laws, such as Title IX. H.R. 5 does all these things. This bill would do much more harm than good in many ways, and the people who would bear the most will be the women and children who would get the brunt of the damage. Again, we can have disagreements on what we believe this to be, but without a full vetting on the possibilities, all the nice language today about what it would or would not do or what it's supposed to do gets under the scrutiny of what the law actually says. And that's the part that I have the most problem with. Not the intent, not the desire. I'm okay. That is something we fight about and we do. And the goodness I never question. It is how you go about it. I've made this statement on this floor before, Madam Speaker, that what makes you feel good does not often heal you. And today may make us feel good, but in the end probably will not do what we intend it to do. And that is a concern, especially with the way this bill has come to the floor.
Now, there are a few different aspects that he's going to bring out because this bill really will target some groups of people. And one of them that he's pointing out here will be women and children. And he's going to set up his case here in a minute for what things they're going to be talking about. And as he does this, I want you to pay close attention to how, as a woman, I'm looking at this and saying, yeah, this bill will not protect my rights. And as women, we are going to lose a lot if this bill passes. So let's go on.
I know there's been considerations. We've considered female sports, in which last year 2 male athletes won the top 2 spots in Connecticut girls Class S indoor track meet. One of those female athletes finished 8th, missed an opportunity to compete in front of college coaches by 2 places. In her words, we all know the outcome of the race before it even starts. It's demoralizing. Allowing men to compete against women in women's sports isn't demoralizing because female athletes like Selena aren't talented. It's demoralizing because it makes their talent irrelevant. I don't say this. This is not Doug Collins' opinion. This is also the opinion of tennis great Martina Navratilova, who explained the threat of H.R. 5 poses to women's sports. Unless you want to completely remake what women's sports means, there can be no blanket inclusion rule. There's nothing stereotypical about this. It's about fairness and it's about science. And that came after she made initial comments, went back after being criticized for them, reviewed it, looked at everything, and then came back with this statement. She basically, again, doubled down and agreed on what she was saying. And this is one not to back away from those with needing equality. If H.R. 5 becomes law, there are others who are asking, what did we do at this moment when we had a chance to look at a bill that maybe we could look at and fix or make it better, but we didn't?
And see, this whole women's sports thing, this is very important because they had to implement a law that if there was not a women's sport available, then, the women got to participate with the boys' sport. And that had to be done to get some kind of equality out there. Well, it's one thing for a woman to participate in a boys' sport with boys. It's another thing for a boy to participate in a woman's sport because biologically speaking, there are differences. Men's bodies are biologically different than women's bodies, and that's in the structure. It's how their muscles work. It's how the strength, the body fat percentage, all of this stuff plays into it. And there is just a difference between the performance ability of a man and the performance ability of a woman in these different sports. So when you have a race, a track race, and you have this woman running against a man, they already know the outcome. And that's what he's saying, that these women that are competing say it's demoralizing because we already know the guy's going to win. And it's not fair. Because we're not competing against women. We're just competing against some guy who says he's a woman, just so he can compete. Anyway, when he's talking about this, it really is something that we need to be aware of, that this is what they're trying to push through. And as a woman, it bothers me a lot because there are a lot of sports that women would like to participate in, and they can in their own division. They can participate and, be challenged by other women in those sports, like the track, like I said, and also wrestling is one. And so those kinds of things, the women can participate in. But when you stack them up against a man, it's kind of a foregone conclusion who's going to win. And that's just not fair. It's not right. It's not fair to the women. So let's go on.
Never before in American history has a political party tried so dramatically to rewrite the federal civil rights laws to include an undefined, self-referential, ideological-driven term called gender identity in the U.S. Code, applicable to literally any entity receives federal assistance, including elementary schools, colleges, and healthcare centers nationwide. H.R. 5 would make self-reporting of gender identity a protected class under federal law and requires doctors and educators to blindly follow the self-reporting of adolescents and young adults. Healthcare protocols and even state law would be no defense, as they would be superseded by federal law under the supremacy clause of the Constitution. I know this has been debated and characterized from my friends across the aisle as not true, but a plain reading of the text says it's true. And this is something we have to deal with.
Now, here's where he's getting into some of the broader application of this. And this is what should scare all of us. Even if you're not a woman, this should scare you, because they're talking about not just dealing with, sports and things like that, but there will be broader ramifications of this, because it's going to reach down into anything that is taxpayer funded in any way. And that's going to include some hospitals. It's going to include, the schools and everything. And this is going to have a real effect on us. And also notice what he said about it being just like it's a self-proclaimed thing. There is no biological test or anything that anyone can submit to. It's just someone declares, today I am a man. Well, tomorrow I am a woman. Who knows? It's just what the person says. And that should bother us, because if people can just get all these benefits and everything just because, well, you got to take my word on it, well, we know how accurate that is. And the idea that people might do these things just to target certain organizations, this could be a real problem because, what happens if you've got a school where a little kid is not being treated very well? Well, they can make this claim that, well, the teacher didn't treat me right, and I think I'm a girl, but I'm really a boy, and the teacher didn't treat me like a girl, and I wanted to be treated like a girl. Well, what are you supposed to do? I'm really glad right now that I'm not teaching in public schools. My heart goes out to those teachers who are doing that, because I would probably be in litigation over this. Because if I'm sitting there and the person is biologically a male, it's hard for me to call them a female, or vice versa. It would be hard. And I don't think I could do it, because it's like, well, you want me to lie to you every day? Yes, you're an elephant. No, I know that you're really not. I know you're a person, but if you think you're an elephant, then I'll just say, well, you know what? Yes, you're an elephant. So really, we wouldn't do that, but that's essentially what they're doing. They're taking biology and they're twisting it all around, which I find this amazing, because these are the people that are yelling at us for the climate change thing and are saying, you don't believe in science. And it's like, well, you don't believe in science because you think that all somebody has to do is say, I'm a male or I'm a female, and that makes them one, when their DNA hasn't changed one iota. And it doesn't matter how many operations they get or what kind of hormone therapy, it doesn't change their DNA. And you know what? God's the one that put the DNA there. So I do have a problem with this kind of thing, and that's my religious beliefs because of that. So what's going to happen when it comes down to something where I have to either go against my religious belief, or I'm going to be penalized in some way? And that's going to happen to some Christian teachers out there. If it hasn't already, it's going to happen. So like I said, my heart goes out to them, and it's the difficult time right now to be a Christian teacher in public schools. So pray for them. If you know any of them, if you send your kids to public school, make sure that you pray for them. And frankly, if you have the ability to homeschool, I suggest it. I really do recommend it. I'm all for that. If you do it well, those kids can be really well adjusted. They can definitely be smart and have more knowledge usually than they do in the public school system. And yeah, that's a public school teacher who was out there teaching for 22 years. I love teaching. Don't get me wrong. I love teaching. But there's an indoctrination that's going on. And when teachers don't want to follow the correct line of thinking, they're usually ousted or pressured in some way to be out. They make it very difficult for them to continue on. So, yeah, right think. We've got to have all those people in there thinking right. Basically, they just say that the teacher's not being a team player, and that's how they get them out. So, yeah, it's really sad. But anyway, let's go on with this, because he continues on with this idea.
We've heard proponents of H.R. 5 call people who oppose it that we're either ignorant, bigoted, oppressive, or hateful. I will not make similar characterizations across the aisle of my friends. I believe we have a genuine disagreement here. That is what this House floor is for, but unfortunately it is a closed rule today and has been relatively closed in the process up until this point. Madam Speaker, I would implore my colleagues to listen to the stories of stakeholders everywhere, including the transgender girls and boys this bill is meant to help, because we may be hurting them by allowing doctors to prescribe hormones or perform major surgeries on adolescents without parental consent or involvement. In fact, H.R. 5 would actually compel doctors to medicalize children without even consulting their parents. Families of transgender children are begging Congress to listen to them. But also,
Now see, that amazes me. Can you imagine that these kids can be treated in this way without parental consent? Yeah. When I was a little kid, I had older brothers. I didn't have any sisters. And for a period of time, I was jealous of them because they got to do some things that I couldn't do. The boys got to do things that I couldn't do because I was a girl. And, probably at that time, I would have been pressured into this if I'd have been from that kind of family. And who knows, I could have ended up a guy. And it's like, yeah, I'm so glad I'm not at this point. But it just is something that, these kids are being pressured into, and they have no idea. teenage years are really difficult. I worked with high schoolers, so I, had a lot of students that were going through those transitional phases where the hormones are going and your body's changing and things are just all up in the air and you don't always know what you are. You think you're an adult, but then you know you're not an adult, and you sometimes want to act like a kid and sometimes you want to act like an adult, and you just are frustrated by the whole situation. It's tough. It's a tough period in life. Can you imagine adding this extra thing to it? I mean, it just is something most kids don't need. They've already got enough they're dealing with just making that transition into adulthood. And then you turn around and you add this extra thing on there. And they usually present it as it will make things so different. And the old adage about the grass being greener on the other side. Well, the boys are told that it'll be easier if they're a girl, and the girls are told it'll be easier if they're boys. And it's not. It's the same all the way through. I mean, there are some challenges that guys have that girls don't. And there's some challenges the girls have that guys don't. It's just a matter of everybody going through that transitional phase and growing up. And to try to sell it to them, and I think this is what's happening, that they're trying to sell it to them as this is going to solve your problem. Well, if you take the decision process out of the hands of the parents who understand that these kids are teenagers or they're going through this stage in life where they're transitioning into adulthood, you don't have that perspective anymore. And these kids are not able to make that level of a decision at that point. So why would you take out the whole parental consent thing? Why do you want to bypass that? Why do the Democrats want to bypass parental consent? Because they know that if they can get the kids on their side, then when they grow up and they start voting, then they'll vote for them. Yeah, it does come back to it. It really does. And also, they're keeping them down on the plantation that way. That's how they're, exercising their control over them. So that's what they're trying to pass this through without people arguing about it at this point, or amending it so that those instances can't happen.
But also, H.R. 5 endangers the First Amendment rights of every single American because the bill makes no provision for sincerely held religious belief. It will criminalize the fundamental tenets of major world religions, including Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Biological sex is a scientific reality, yet H.R. 5 would target faith traditions that acknowledge it as such and want to live their lives accordingly.
I think this is a key, too, because it really would, try to limit what Christians could do. It's an attempt to try to muzzle anyone whose faith believes that there is a man and there is a woman and there's not all these other genders or whatever, and that if you're born a woman, you are a woman. If you're born a man, you are a man. And, we get that from our Creator. That is such an important role inside of us. And just for a moment, let me point out something from a Christian perspective, that a lot of these things they're trying to implement really strike at the heart of the idea of a creator. That there is a God who gave us certain specific characteristics, that he made some male and he made some female. And when they strike at the heart of that, they're really targeting the creator God because he's the one behind it. The idea of gender was God's idea. It wasn't ours. And he's the one that puts it within all of us. And so that's one of the things that they're really trying to target. And when you see these kinds of things going on, you see it as an anti-Christian type of targeting because, you do have a spiritual realm. And in that spiritual realm, you've got people who like God and people who don't like God. And so, there is this spiritual battle going on. And I think that this whole idea of trying to normalize this behavior is part of that. And I think it's something that, really does play a role in the spiritual warfare that's going on that we don't necessarily see with our regular human eyes.
Today, we must listen to all Americans, including LGBTQ community, and recognize many within the community have also raised concerns about this legislation. H.R. 5, in the words of the Women's Liberation Front leader, nullifies women and girls as a coherent legal category worthy of civil rights protection. It would endanger the millions of American women and undermine fundamental American rights to faith in both religion and science, and actively put children at risk by medicalizing them in harmful and permanent ways without parental involvement. I would urge all my colleagues to join me in opposing this bill, which is being rushed to the floor without members having the opportunity to vote on amendments, and I believe carefully consider what is being put before them. Again, Madam Speaker, think about what we're asking here. For the first time, and something was raised in our committee hearing that said that, do you think people would commit fraud by doing all these changes and going through medical procedures and everything, that they would do that just to simply commit fraud? Let me remind you, Madam Speaker, and to anyone listening this morning, this bill does not require any of that. It requires nothing except a self-admonishment or knowledge that I am what I say I am today. That's all this bill requires. So many of us are just asking, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to look at this? I don't know, probably not. But in this way, this is not right and is being rushed. And again, as I started today, I'll sort of end as well. Sometimes what makes you feel good, and I understand the majority's desire to bring this forward and to fulfill a promise. I get it. But in the end, is it also going to do what you want it to do in the long run? Or is there going to be unintended consequences that we don't want to acknowledge today in our rush to do something we promised? Sometimes it's better to back up and make sure it's right before we can fulfill a promise. And with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve.
I think it's really good that he pointed it out yet again, that this is not something that is, like biological. This is something anti-biological, if you want to say it that way. But it's something that all it takes is someone declaring, I am whatever gender you want to be. And that is just not how we need to run things, because it's like saying, well, I am black. Well, it's great that maybe I feel that way, that I feel such a connection to the black community, but you've seen my picture, I'm not. And there's just no way that I can claim that, but it is not who I am. And it's denying a fact of reality. This is the whole thing about all of this, that it's denying reality. The reality is your DNA, and that just doesn't change. So, I'm glad he pointed that out, because this is something that has to be considered when you're talking about this. Now, as for this particular bill, yeah, well, it was voted on. And anyway, here is the legislation. As always, I put it down below. You can see the whole thing. But here's a summary of it. This is what it says, and it's called the Equality Act. That's what they're calling it. This bill prohibits discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity in areas including public accommodations and facilities, education, federal funding, employment, housing, credit, and the jury system. Specifically, the bill defines and includes sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity among the prohibited categories of discrimination or segregation. The bill expands the definition of public accommodations to include places or establishments that provide 1. Exhibitions, recreation, exercise, amusement, gatherings, or displays, 2. Goods, services, or programs, and 3. Transportation services. The bill allows the Department of Justice to intervene in equal protection actions in federal court on account of sexual orientation or gender identity. The bill prohibits an individual from being denied access to a shared facility, including a restroom, a locker room, and a dressing room that is in accordance with the individual's gender identity. And remember, all it takes is someone to say it. So, temporarily, if some guy wants to get into a women's dressing room, he can just say, well, you know what? Today I feel like a woman. And he can walk in there. And it would be protected by courts, by our Department of Justice, if this completely passes. Now, it did pass the House. Yeah, it did. Of course, it was mostly on party lines, but it wasn't totally. Look at this. You had 228 Democrats, 0 no's. They were all ayes, and 8 Republicans voted aye on this. So the vote ended up 236 to 173. There were 23 who didn't vote. And here's a list of all of them that were ayes. Now, if you look through, the ones that are in italics are the Republicans. So Brooks from Indiana, I'm not sure where he's from. I think probably southern Indiana. I'm not familiar with what district he's from. And I don't know, Catco. Well, here's the whole list. Let me just go here. This is the whole list. There are 8 of them. Brooks from Indiana, Diaz-Balart, Florida, Fitzpatrick, Pennsylvania, Hurd, Texas, Catco, New York, Reed, New York, Stefanik, New York, and Walden, Oregon. So kind of a little surprising, maybe the Brooks and the one from Texas, Hurd, but, there are places in both of our states that have liberals there, so I don't know where exactly they are. But yeah, kind of surprising that there were 8 of them. Was a big number. So I'm going to put this article down there below too, because this is from Todd Starnes, and he focused more on the faith assault part of it, which I think that's going to be a major factor. I mean, how easy is it going to be for them then to take targets at Christian churches? Because imagine your Christian church, all right? You go to church Sunday morning and you have to go to the restroom, and you walk into the restroom and there is a person of the other gender using your restroom. So, it really is kind of creepy that all this could happen, but they're trying their best. And like I said, 8 Republicans voted with them on it. So now I am not in any way saying you should treat people poorly because of any of this. Even if they are supporting that delusion that they are a different gender than what their biological actual DNA says, that's still no reason to treat people poorly. I don't think we should treat people poorly for any reason whatsoever. But that does not mean that we have to agree with what they're doing and agree with that lifestyle and support it. Because you see, this is a difference between, I think, Republicans and Democrats. Republicans can say, we disagree with your lifestyle. We disagree with how you're doing this or that. But it doesn't change that we're going to treat you respectfully and we're going to, care about you as a person. So I don't think anybody should be treated poorly because of any of their decisions, but I do think that we have to remember these flashing ads. They drive me nuts. They really do. Anyway, I don't think we should in any way support what they're doing with this. And as a Christian, I can't support that. Now, if you have different beliefs, that's up to you. That's between you and God, and that's, up to you. But for me, with my faith, I can't support those lifestyles. And, it's not something that I would encourage people to do, because I think God has a better way. He's the one that created us, and he wrote the user manual, if you want to say it that way, with the Bible, and we have the information there. When we follow that, we get the best possible world that we can get if we're all following it. But we know that doesn't happen with everybody. But this was an interesting little article that he put out. And, he does a lot of good stuff about the religion and how some of this legislation is affecting it. So I like to keep an ear out for Todd Starnes on this. And, there's a clip here you can watch. So, yeah, it just is one of those things that I think we need to be concerned about. It won't make it past the Senate, or at least we hope it won't. So maybe you need to contact your senators and tell them that you don't want this bill passing, because this could be very dangerous, I think. Setting it up this way, these are a lot of things, and it would pretty much put the kibosh on any Christians saying that this is not right. And, the Bible teaches something different. And when you are doing that, then are you going to be taken to court? And keep in mind that the Supreme Court can only uphold laws. They're not supposed to write their own laws. So even if Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and all the other conservatives said this wasn't right, they may know it's not right, But if the law is put out there, if it becomes law, then they will have to support it. Now, it's not going to make it because Trump's going to veto this, I'm pretty sure, but it shouldn't even make it through the Senate. So we've got to contact our senators, make sure they know that we do not want this to pass. This is a very important thing. And again, it's not that we want anyone treated poorly or discriminated against, but we do need to draw a line when it comes to like bathrooms and changing rooms and locker rooms and things like that to protect our women and children. That's what needs to be done. And we really need to make sure that, things like this are not just slipped in there because they're rushed through real quick without any chance for the public to find out what's really going on. So that's what I've got for you on this one. And real quick, for those who enjoy, I try to keep these things to the end so I don't bother people that are here for just that content. But the wedding went really well. We had a great time. Loved being with my family and extended family. And it was just a really good afternoon. So I just wanted to give you a little update on that. So that's it for this one. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.